Okay, so a little review of where we've been so far. If I started with this and said 4 comma 11, bracket on the 11, parenthesis around the 4. Let's say this is the ages of people that at the skydiving school that they have taken skydiving. Let me ask you this question. Have they taken any 4-year-olds skydiving? No. Because at 4 is a parenthesis, and that means that if they haven't actually done a 4. Have they done an 11? Yes, because there's a bracket there. And the implication is they've done every age in between. Okay? All right, what if they said this? 5 bracket. They get a little more technical and they say this. All right, have they done 5-year-olds? Have they done 6, 7, and 8-year-olds? Yeah. Have they done 9, 10, and 11-year-olds? It's between 8 and 11, so yep, they've done 9, 10, and 11-year-olds. They all have brackets, so yeah, they're apparently done all of those ages between 5 and 11. That's just another way to say it. Do they really need this whole 8 and 8 thing? They could have just said 5 to 11. Yep. 5 comma 11 would have done the same thing. All right. I'd like you to take this picture I draw and make me one of those parenthesis bracket deals for, let's say, ages in this class go from 14, and I don't think there's any of those, all the way up to 19. And let's say I thought we had one of those. Draw me the little parenthesis bracket dealy, Bob, that would go with this. That's officially called interval notation. (14, 19), and the only hard part is it brackets parentheses around the 14. Parentheses and then a bracket on the 19. Raise your hand if you had that right. Okay, good. Moving on. Next thing that was kind of important was if we're going to take a quadratic equation, there's like 4 ways you can solve a quadratic. Is this one your classic quadratic that's in like standard form? Yes, it is, because it equals what? It equals 0. And then you can use several different ways. You could graph this side, graph that side, and see where they cross. You could factor it. And let's say it was like this, x and plus 1 and plus 1. Does this thing factor or not? No, because that's the only way I could do it is this has to break up into an x and an x. A 1 has to break up into a 1 and a 1. And these are all pluses. They have to all be pluses. So I've done it the only way it could be done, and it doesn't work. How do I know it doesn't work? That and that don't make what? 3x. So this did not work. All right. If it had worked, then my answer would have been -1 and -1. Those would be my zeros, but it didn't work. So what do I do when it doesn't work? Quadratic formula. Very good. So would you please, right now, from memory, write out the quadratic formula. If you don't have it memorized, you need to memorize it. You're past due for memorizing that puppy. All right. Do you have x equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a? Raise your hand if you had it right. Okay, good. Then, if I'm going to put my numbers in here, I'm going to take out my variables. My b's, I'm going to put a parenthesis. My a and my c, I'm going to put parentheses. And my a, at the end, I'm going to put parentheses. And then I drop in my numbers. Go ahead and do that and see if you can figure out the final answer. It'll have a square root in it, and that's okay. Don't use a calculator though, because there's a part of your test that says no calcs, and I'm glad you know how to do it with a calc, because we'll do that in a minute. But right now, I just want you to do it with formula. The first test you have is a no calculator test, the one on Tuesday. So it won't ask you to graph anything, of course, but it'll ask you to solve this kind of a question. And you'll have to be able to use your brain only. So negative b, that's negative 3, plus or minus square root of b squared, which would be, I'm going to make this whole thing into a 9. Minus 4 times a is 1 times c is 1, and that means 9 minus 4, and 9 minus 4 is 5, so it's all over 2 times 1. So I got negative 3 plus or minus root 5 all over 2. Raise your hand if you had that. Good. Then you know how to use the quadratic formula. All right. Let me ask you this. What if it came out like this? Could you simplify that? Yes or no? Yes. If there's one in each part, you can simplify it. I've gone through a long explanation on this before, but now I'm getting the part where I got to just jump to how you do it instead of why. You go 2 goes in here once, 2 goes in here once, and 2 goes in here once. And then this one right here is really important because a lot of kids think when you cancel, you just disappear, but it's not. It turns into a 1. So this is 1 plus or minus 1 root 3, which is just root 3. And then all divided by 1 doesn't really do anything, right? So then I'm done. That's it. I want to give you one like that. Try this. 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 all over 6. Just simplify that one. There's a couple things you can do. All right. Mr. P, tell me, what should I do? Give me some stuff I can do. Sure. Simplify it for me. Oh, what's that? What is square root of 4? All right, so I can put 2 in there. Okay. Now, can you go farther? Yeah, 2 goes into everything. 2 goes in here how many times? And 2 goes in here how many times? And 2 goes in there how many times? All right. So it's 1 plus or minus 1 over 3. Do I have to actually finish it? Yes, you do, because I have all the numbers. So it's 1 plus 1 over 3 and 1 minus 1 over 3. I'm going to do it separate. 1 plus 1 over 3 and 1 minus 1 over 3. What's that one? 2/3. What's that one? 0 over 3. Now, there's 2 kinds of 0 things in fractions. Is 0 over 3 the one that's okay? Or, in other words, is it okay to have a 0 on the top? Yes, it is. Is it okay to have a 0 on the bottom? No, it's not. Okay, so this one's okay. 0 over 3 is okay. It's just 0. Because 0, I have 0 cookies divided amongst 3 people. We all get 0 cookies. So it's 0. That makes sense. If we had this, it's I have 3 cookies divided amongst 0 people, and that's like, what? And so the calculator says error. So this is bad. Can't have that. This is okay, and the answer is just 0. So this one's 2/3. So my answers are 2/3 and 0. And just to clarify, are these x's or y's? It's x's because x equals negative b, remember? X equals, and x equals. Those are all x's. All right. That's basically the new stuff for today. Because what you did yesterday was you'd have had that same kind of a problem like this, and you'd have been asked to graph it. Well, today is here's the problem, except you can't graph it. And if you can't factor it, then you got to go right to quadratic formula to solve it. All right. So since this one won't factor, I'd use quadratic formula. Let's say I could graph it. I'd graph the left side. I'd graph the right side. Would you take a second, grab your calculator, and graph it? Let's see if we can get the answer that way. I need you to be good at this because when this comes up, it should be the easy points from the test. You know how there's hard ones and easy ones on the test? Anything that involves your calculator like this should be an easy one. It's just about knowing how to type the buttons in right. And you guys are young. You typically catch on to technology pretty fast. This needs to be like a gimme for you. It's like the Vikings playing the... Who's really bad this year? The Vikings playing the Vikings, sadly. Anyway, okay. It's the easy game. Okay, so I gotta find my calculator. Where is it? There it is. Okay. And, what just happened there? Okay, x squared plus 3x plus 4. Everybody type that puppy in. X squared plus 3x plus 4. This is not time for you to just sit there. Please be typing this in. If you need a calculator, borrow one of mine. 1 second here. And the other side is 0. I'm going to clear that. 0. Enter. I'm going to pause for a second. Somebody has a question and start recording again. All right. Why don't you see two lines crossing? Because if you think about it, I'm going to zoom in on this a little closer. Zoom in is number 2. And I have to say, where do I want to zoom in? I hit enter. There. Look it. Why? Because the line at 0, which is going across like right here, isn't touching the other line. What does that mean? That means there's no x-intercepts, that's correct, and there's no solutions. Just to clarify, there's no real solutions. What does that mean? That means that when you're doing one of these kind of problems, if you do the quadratic formula, I'm going to do it really quick. Watch what happens. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac, and a is 1 and c is 4, all over 2a, and a is 1, so it's just 2. Watch what happens underneath the root. Negative 3 plus or minus square root of 9 minus 8, which would be 1. Okay, what did I do wrong? 16. 9, it's not 8. It's 4 times 4 is 16. 9 minus 16 is negative 7. All over 2. You see what happened right there? See there's a negative underneath the root? What does that mean? Imaginary numbers are involved, which means they're not what? They're not real. That means when you graph it, you won't get a real answer. So if all we asked is what are the real solutions, you'd say none. Because when you graph it, they don't touch. All right, but if you use the quadratic formula, it'll always work, including if you get a negative answer underneath the root. So here's my answers. They just have an imaginary component to them because they have a negative under the root. All right. Moving on. Another thing that you learned in the past that I need to bring back to the front because it's going to be used again. I guarantee you, you'll need to know this. In fact, you'll need to know it 4 times. Once on this test, once on a test about a month later, once on the final, and then once in after the first semester final, once in second semester. We do it again. This comes up a ton. All right, so let's learn this linear regression thing, linreg. All right, I'm going to ask you to put this data into your calculator. 1, 2, 3, and 4, going with 5, 10, 15, and 20. Okay, so how do you do this? You go to your calculator screen, you go, first of all, I gotta get rid of that. I'm gonna go to Stat. Under Stat, and you hit Edit. And you make it 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 10, 15, 20. I'm just using those numbers because if they were really complicated numbers, it would just take longer to type in, that's all. So it's the same exact process. Yes. If you have a big list of numbers, you go up to the top here, and you hit clear right on that number. Don't hit delete or you'll delete the entire list. Hit clear. Okay? You don't want to delete the entire list, otherwise it disappears and then you don't have a list 2 anymore. And it messes up your life permanently. Okay, so it's probably safest to just hit delete on each number. But... all right, so now I got my data in. Raise your hand if you're this far. You've got your data in. All right, good. Then, next step, hit stat. Do you remember where it is? It's under calculate. Go over to calculate. And which one is it? Number 4, the Lin Reg one. And now it's waiting. How come it hasn't done anything yet? Just have to hit enter. You normally tell it which is X and which is Y, but if you put them in the right spot in the first place, use L1 and L2, you can just default. So you just hit enter. And there it is. Y equals AX plus B, where A is 5 and B is 0. So it's my equation. Y equals 5X plus 0. Do you get how this comes out to Y? Equals 5X plus 0. Just dropping in the 5 and 0. Okay, now let's make sure you understand how you'd use that. This is a really important part. So, if it's Y equals 5X plus 0 really doesn't do anything, so I'm just going to leave it off. What if this was about time and snakes? One of my friends had a hole in the brick outside of her house, and so snakes climbed in that hole and decided it would be a great place to live. So she had snakes in her basement. Literally, it was they were living and breeding in her basement. So all of a sudden it started off as like, you know, a snake or two, laid eggs. All of a sudden there's snake babies everywhere. It's got little baby snakes running around in her house. Can you imagine how disgusting that would be? There's actually online, if you go to YouTube, you can watch a video of a person who had snakes that got somehow into the walls of their house. So they were like sticking their head out from inside the house or outside the house because they were in the walls, living inside her house. Anyway, and in fact, it was really, really bad. They sold their house to somebody, and they even knew that there were snakes. They thought they could get out of them. They couldn't get the snakes out of the house. They eventually gave up on the house and left because they couldn't take it. Because they thought they'd be able to, well, we'll just get rid of the snakes because we're getting this house really cheap. They couldn't get rid of the snakes. They're really tough to get rid of. So anyway, say on day 1, they find 5 snakes. On day 2, they find 10 snakes. Day 3, they find 15. Maybe they get better at finding them or something. All right, so what can we get from this? What, besides fear? What's that? What's that? What's X? Time. What's Y? Snakes. Say that I had found, or say that I went to day 7. Do you get how that goes under X? So if I said day 7, you'd put it right there, and you could figure out what? 35 snakes. Okay. And if I said snakes is 50, I'd put a 50 right there. You get that? And then I could solve and figure out that X would have to be what? 10. So 10 days, I had 50 snakes on day 10. All right. So let's do one that's, I'm going to give you the data. I'm going to tell you what it is. And then I'm going to ask you to figure out the equation for it and use the equation to make a prediction. All right. So let's say Apple stock. One of those depressing stories for me because I owned Apple back when it was $22 a share. It currently sells for $670 a share. So every share that I would have kept at $22, and I had probably at least 1,000 shares. And if my 1,000 shares right now, I held on to it, it'd be worth what? $670,000. Yeah, enough to buy a nice, medium-sized house on the Lake Minnetonka, or just, you know, lots and lots of Snickers bars. Anyway, so Apple stock, since people have been kind of paying attention to it, was back in 2009. Okay, that's not that long ago. Okay, 2009 versus now, we're talking about 3 years. Apple's price was at about $100 a share. So I'm going to say in 2009, it was $100 a share. I am totally rounding here, but In 2010, had it gone up to about $200 a share. In 2011, it went up to about $350 a share. Current time, 2012, it's at $670 a share. Because Apple's come out with some really kick-butt products, especially the iPhone. I heard a new stat the other day. Just iPhone sales, just the sales of the iPhone alone, are the same amount of money that Microsoft brings in as a company. All of Microsoft. Microsoft used to be the big giant tech company, and they're still big, but just the iPhone alone sales are enough to take over all of that huge company. All right, Microsoft, the one that made Bill Gates gazillionaire. That's like, was the richest guy in the world for a while, and then it was Warren Buffett for a while, and it's now, you know what the current richest guy in the world is? Carlos Slim. He's a Mexican guy that owns a big telecom. He owns basically telecommunications in Mexico. Okay, anyway, there's your numbers. That sound real world enough for you? It's pretty real world. They're Apple prices, etc. Would you please type those into your stat, underneath your stat button, and edit? So I'm going to go to stat. Good question. I would just put in 2000. It works just as well to put, this is 2009. I just put 2009. 2009. It works fine. You can do that. Just put in the exact numbers they give you. It works fine. 2010, 2010, 2011, and 2012. Then go over to my prices for the stock, and it's 100. And what did I say? It was 200. And then 350, and then 6. Oh, I did times. See, delete that. 350, and then 670. So, if I want to do a linear regression for this, I got to hit stat, linreg, or under calculate. Sorry, linreg is the fourth one. I hit enter, and there it is. Cool. So now, I'm going to put this up on the board here. Y equals 186x plus or minus 3736.23. That doesn't, hold on. 373623. Okay. Now, my data is a little bit messed up because this data is not making a straight line. Do you get how my Apple price kind of went up, kind of started out straight, and now it went up really fast, faster than it should have? So my numbers are off a little bit, but we wouldn't do this to you. We'd have numbers that do go up nice and straight. But I'm trying to use real world. I probably would actually be using quadratic because this is curved so much that it would match quadratic data better because Apple's price is just kind of going through the roof. So anyway, that's why it looks a little weird. But I'm just going to ask you to figure out, when will Apple's price be 1,000? Well, then you only have two places you could put it. It's either X or it's Y. What do you think you should do? Stick it under X or Y? Why? Because X is time. And Y is price. And I gave you a price. So it's 1,000 goes here. Again, it's not going to work out really nice because my data I gave you isn't very linear. What did you come up with? It's probably a negative number. No, wait, it's not negative. 2014? Okay, so what's that telling you? Apple will hit 1,000 in 2014. Heard it here first, folks. But it probably will hit that before that because remember, it's kind of not very going in a straight line. It's going really steep. So it might hit it before that. But you don't know that. If I knew that for sure, I would sell everything I have and buy Apple stock. Because if it's going to go from 670 to 1,000, I'll make like 30% on whatever I put in there. So if I could get 200 grand for my house, another, say, 200 grand for all the other stuff I have, so I put 400 grand into it, I'd make $150,000 for sure. Okay. Anyway, that's linear regression, and I hope that you got the idea how that works now. All right. I think I've covered everything that you need to know so far, and now the important part is that you go back, look at your worksheets, check the one that last night, the answers didn't get put up until like really late last night. Check that one. If you're doing it wrong, fix them. And I've got a new worksheet right here, which I'm going to help you start. We'll do the first couple together. Okay, here you go. 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3. Perfect. All right, it says algebraically on the top of the worksheet. That's the key. Number 1 is super simple. I'll tell you, though, it does not factor. So you pretty much have to use a quadratic formula. Let's look at the first one where it's kind of weird is number 4. What's weird about number 4? Not equal to 0. X squared plus 4 is equal to 4x. And if I was allowed to graph, I'd graph this side, I'd graph that side, and I would see where they cross. This would be a straight line, this would be a curve, and I'd just see where they crossed. That would be a way to get the answer. What if you were trapped at home with no internet access, but you had your graphing calculator? Could you do that to check your answers tonight? Absolutely, that would work. Because calculators aren't allowed on this, but at the same time, you could use it to check yourself. For Pete's sakes, you can just look at the answer on the internet. So, no problem with using the calculator to check yourself. But remember, the test on this won't allow calculators. You better know what to do. First step, move this over here. So I'll have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 0. Why do I have to do that? Now it's in standard form. Now I know what a, b, and c are. Oops. Stay with me. All right, so a, b, and c. X equals negative b, plus or minus square root. Okay, so it's negative b, which really is the opposite of b. So b is negative 4, so we're going to say positive. Plus or minus the square root of b squared over 4ac. B squared minus 4ac. B squared is negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times a times c. All over 2 times 1. All right, and a is 1, c is 4. Ooh, this one's going to work out cool. You see what happens underneath the root? It's 4 plus or minus, what did that root turn out to be? 0. What's the square root of 0? 0. Put a 0 there. Over 2. And then you have to do it once with plus and once with minus. Or do you really? Isn't plus 0 and minus 0 going to be the exact same thing? All right, so then it's like 4 plus 0 is just 4. 4 minus 0 is just 4. So what's 4 over 2? 1/2. How could there be only one answer? Well, if you graph this thing, you know what would happen? It would touch exactly 4 times 2. 4 times 2 is 16. 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 4 times 2 on the line like this. And that's the spot 1/2 right there. It would touch right there. It would only touch once. Okay? So we call it a double touch or a bounce. Remember that terminology? Uh-oh, I make a mistake in here somewhere? Scary. Okay, yes? No, wait. Oh, 4 divided by 2 is 2. Thank you. It's not a half. Great. Yeah. Everything else I was saying was right, though. The double touch right there. Okay, do stop me when I make a mistake. Yes? Could you have factored it? All right, let's see if we can factor this puppy. Factoring is definitely a good plan if it works. I'll warn you, most times it won't work. But it does work sometimes. I think you're right on this one, it might. X and X, and how do I make a 4? I was thinking 4 and 1, and that would make a total of 5. It wouldn't make 4, but what else could I do? 2 and 2, and then since I know it works, I'm going to go, okay, well, it's got to be 2 and 2 then, and it's got to have 2 negatives to make this positive 4. Negative and a negative, and there we go. And x equals 2. It's a double bounce. It's got 2 answers that are the same thing. You can just write it once, or you can write it twice if you want to. It won't hurt. Yes. Yes, read it. All right, I wanted to show you how to do one absolute value. Would you agree that what I just scribbled out there, what's underneath there, has to be 2? Or what else could it be? Exactly, so that's exactly what you write. You take this t minus 8 here, and you say t minus 8 has to be 2, or t minus 8 has to be negative 2. See what I just did there? I just wrote 2 equations. If I solve those 2 equations, I got the answers. Any absolute value can be split into 2 answers. Once for when the thing inside, I'll cover it up again. What's inside there has to either be 2, 2 would equal 2, duh, or negative 2 absolute value of that would also equal 2. So I set it up once with 2 and once with negative 2. I'm going to solve those 2 equations, which would be easy peasy, and you got your 2 answers. Could I also have graphed this and graphed this and see where they cross? Yep. And it would give me the 2 answers that way. But on the test, you take first, there's no calcs. Okay, so you have to know how to do it by hand, which is just splitting it up into 2 equations. So add 8 to both sides, t equals 10. Add 8 to both sides, t equals 6. There you go. That's just 6 and 10. Okay, that's how you do 8 and 9 and 10. Those are all like it. All right, how about number 11? I have a square root to get rid of. That's going to be a pain. I'll help you if you watch. X plus 2 minus 2 root x plus 3 is equal to 0. Okay, I went too fast for my board. Freaked it out. Okay, now I'm going to get this thing right here alone. Just like, remember last time we had absolute value of this is equal to that? This thing was alone on its side. The absolute value was alone. We got to get the square root alone. So I'm going to get rid of this and this and this, and then I will have my square root alone. Okay? So I'm going to move this over to the other side by minus x. Move that over to the other side by subtracting 2. I'm going to just do those 2 steps first. Negative x minus 2. See what I just did there? Move this and this over to the other side. Okay? Now I'm going to get rid of that negative 2 there. How do I do that? Divided by negative 2. Divided by negative 2. Cancels. Square root of x plus 3 is equal to negative x minus 2 over negative 2. I think it's all over the place over there. Now, how do you get rid of... Remember, trying to get this square root out of there. Let me go back to, let's say that you had to solve this and you were allowed to use a calculator like in the real world. Because in the real world, they don't say you may not use a calculator. Okay. Even if it's on the SAT or the ACT test, you're allowed to use a calculator, right? What could you have done at the very beginning? Yeah, just typed into your calculator and graph this side, graph that side, see where they cross. Any big equation. And then keep pounding on that until you recognize that you can always do that. Graph both sides, see where they cross. All right, it's back to, since I can't do that, that's why I'm here now. Okay, so now how do I get rid of the square root? I square both sides. All right, if I square both sides, it's this squared and this. And then I'm going to have x plus 3 is equal to, now remember, it's only if I square root both sides that it brings in the absolute value. We don't have that here. I'm squaring both sides. Squaring both sides is okay. All right, so to square this, ooh, that's going to be ugly. Because then squaring means times itself, right? It's negative x minus 2 over negative 2 times negative x minus 2 all over negative 2. Whew. Nasty. Well, the bottom part's easy. Negative 2 times negative 2. What's that mean? 4. X plus 3 is equal to some nasty thing over 4. And the nasty thing, negative x minus 2 times negative x minus 2. You have to do first, outside, inside, last. It will be a quadratic. And this was just a nasty one. So from there, I'm going to let you see if you can figure it out yourself. If you can, you're probably in the top 5% of math students. All right. One more I want to help you with. Would you please turn to number 13? Number 13. All right. I know you're working on the other one. Try to just shift gears here. Let me get some free help on 13. Several of the World Cup '94 soccer matches were played at Stanford University Stadium in Menlo Park, California. You realize all that stuff is just like background knowledge? You don't really have to know that to answer the question, right? The field. Ooh, right away. I know I'm talking about a rectangle because it's soccer, and I know what the soccer field looks like, right? So everybody, sketch yourself a little field. I cannot overemphasize how important it's going to be for you to learn to draw good pictures in this class. Seriously, like now till the end of the year, we're going to be doing stuff, and the harder problems, you will always have a picture for them. If you try to do them without a picture, you will have no hope. You have to have a picture. I have to have a picture, or I can't figure them out. Especially when you get to complicated trig stuff. You draw the picture of it, and then it'll make more sense. You got a chance. All right, so now, if I've got this rectangle for a soccer field, and it's 30 yards longer than it is wide, I'm going to say, I don't know width or length, but I'm going to say W for how wide it is, and take a wild guess what I'm going to put the other side. W plus 30. And then it says, and the area of the field is 8,800. I like to put that in the middle. Do you get that the area is the length times the width? Do you see how he just made an equation? This times this has to equal that. W times W plus 30 has to equal 8,800. That was the hard part. I've already done it for you. Now it says solve graphically, which applies using your graphic calculator. And I want to do this one with you because I think you're going to have trouble because once you're done typing into the calculator, you're going to say graph and you won't see anything. I don't want you to see anything because the numbers are huge. And does your calculator automatically adjust its window? No, you have to do that for it. All right, so let's type this puppy right here into your calculator right now. So I'm going to go to y equals, and that's w, and I'm going to call it x, because x is just as good as w. Here's x times x plus 30. Stay with me now. You can all do that if you have a calculator. X times x plus 30. Then what's the other side? All right, so down here I type in 8,800. And then when I say graph, I warned you, You're not going to be able to actually see much. Because why? And if you think about it, when you can't see it, you got to think about the numbers. Oh, these are really big numbers. So I got to use really big numbers for my x and y. All right, think about it for a second. If this thing is a graph that's going to have two things. One part is this part, which is a quadratic. Yet if I multiply this out, it's going to have a square in it. That's a curve. And it's got this one's a straight line. That straight line's going across at 8,800. Like way, there's going to be a curve and some line way the heck up there. Okay, so we have to get up really high on the graph. So you need to think it through and go to the window, which is this button right there. It's red on my screen right now. Window. Now, the x, I don't know, but I know it needs to be bigger than 10. I'm going to go with like 500. So let's go negative 500. Notice it's not the minus sign, it's the negative sign. 500 to 500. And then the y, and if that hadn't worked, I would just play around and try something else. Y I'm in, well, I don't know. It goes to 8,800. I'm going to say, how about 9,000? But the minimum is usually negative, so I'm going to say negative 9,000 and positive 9,000. Graph. I can see them crossing. Sometimes it takes you 2 or 3 tries to like keep making it bigger and bigger. Generally speaking, go too big, because you can usually still see it if you went too big. If you go a little too small, you can't see where they cross. Now that I see where they cross, do you remember this second calculate where they intersect? Second calculate intersect. And remember the first 2 times, the first 2 things it asks you is this the first line? It'll always be on the first line. Hit enter. It'll always be on the second line. Hit enter. So if you only use 2 equations, you can just hit enter, enter. And then you arrow over to right where they touch. And you hit enter. And it says intersection. X equals 80. Sweet. Now, do you think I needed the 8,800? I already knew that. They already told me that, right? So I needed the 80. Now, why do you think I'm not using the negative one? Go back to what we're talking about. What are we talking about here? Soccer field. Can you have a soccer field that's negative some yards long? No. That's why I don't want to use that one. Okay, I'm only going to use the answer that makes sense. The answer that comes out positive was the only one that has a chance of making sense. So if x is 80, now I go back to my soccer field and I say 80. Where do I put the 80? Well, this is 80. And then this one wouldn't be 80. What would it be? 80 plus 30, which would be 110. 80 by 110 makes 8,800. Yay. Figured it out. All right, so I figured out my answer was 80. So that meant my soccer field had to be 80 by the other number, which obviously is not 80. It says it's 30 longer than that. All right, I did that whole problem. I really shouldn't have, but I just couldn't stop myself. Besides, it's the first time you've seen one. You'll see one again. You'll see one again after that. And I wanted to walk you through the whole process. Make a picture. Graph it. When the graph, I could see you guys getting home, hitting graph, and you're like, how come I can't see it? And I needed to remind you to make your window bigger. All right. Now, there is some review on here. If there's something in here on review, even more than the problems that were originally given to you, if the person making the worksheet took the time to do it as a review problem, it's probably coming on the test. You get what I'm saying? Because a lot of times we'll have a trick question in with the regular questions, but we're not going to do that on the review section. So I'd say your review problems are more important than average problems because they're hints to what's important overall. All right. That was a long, intense hour, but I helped you with your homework. Start it. You can finish it. You check it on Schoology. Come back ready. And it's about time to go. Have a good day.